Hi everyone, welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, a podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters, and enthusiasts like Josh and myself. I am Dan.
I am Josh.
There we go. And we are otherwise here to talk about all things quizzical and arboreal.
You had to reach for that one.
That's a big reach for that one.
You got it.
I like the reach.
You got it, but you had to dig. You reached down deep into that bag there.
I did. That's my shtick, so I'm going to stick with that. So, because today we're going to talk about a couple of email questions that we got in the meantime, and all things Bloodwood. So, hence the arboreal.
Well, not all things Bloodwood.
No, just the geographical.
We're gonna talk mainly about the geographical, but we got some questions in our big batch of questions between our last recording session and this one that were not related to Astral Sight. If you missed last week's Astral Sight episode,
pause now. Go back and listen to it.
Go back and listen to that one. But these are the questions that came in that were not related to Astral Sight, and so we bumped them off to this week.
Yeah, because last week was a nice hour-long episode anyway. So we got some long questions as well. But first, actually a player aid for everyone out there from Mr. Matthew. So, gentlemen, on Wednesday, January 13th, Lars and I launched Steps Beta 9. And for the first time, Steps Desktop Edition. The Desktop Edition is an offline version of Steps for all of the major desktop OS platforms. The Desktop Edition of Steps is exactly the same version as Lars' web version, except I repackaged it to work offline. If you are not familiar with Steps, it's an interactive character sheet for Earthdawn. It allows you to create, run, and manage your Earthdawn characters. I think the opportunity is huge to expand the Earthdawn fanbase, in particular in the COVID era. Any additional help we can get as a community can't hurt. If you have a few seconds in an upcoming episode, could you mention the Steps and Step Desktop Edition? I put a link to my blog post on install instructions, and Josh will actually put the link in the show notes. So anybody
I'll put the link in the show notes. I'll also put it in the Twitter feed for the show as well. And I will put that link in the feed before this episode goes up. Because I'll put that up. I will probably post it again, but I will put that up this evening as a thing.
Yeah.
And yes, I've used, I haven't used it extensively, but I've played around with the web version of Steps. It's good. I mean, it's not final. There's still some stuff that's being worked on with it and little bits and fiddly things and whatnot. But, a desktop version.
I'm going to go play.
It's cool.
One of my next couple days off, since he's pretty much got it finalized now, I'm going to go play with that and see what it looks like and see if my group can use it.
Yeah.
Just so that my game master can have all this stuff ready. So
it's very useful if you are going to be playing if you're going to have tablets or computers or something like that handy where you can actually look at it on the screen. I don't know whether the desktop version allows printing.
Fair.
I don't think the web version really allows printing particularly well. So that's like the one downside of it. Virag, I have her character basically tracked in a Google spreadsheet. So there's an online version.
Yeah.
But then I frequently will print off the pages and have them to refer to so that I'm not juggling as many tabs and screens and so forth when we're actually doing our online games.
Fair enough. So thank you, Matthew, and I'm pretty sure that the rest of the Earthdawn fan base will thank you as well later, or have some feedback. But otherwise, looking forward to using that without a doubt. On to Brandon. Hi guys, Brandon here, and just wanted to let you know I'm still enjoying your show every week. Well, thank you. We're still enjoying putting it together every week.
You know, I know Brandon you two are doing this.
Pardon?
Isn't Brandon the orc player?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he didn't write it in character this time.
He didn't write it in character this time, but no.
I'm not doing the voice. I know you two are doing this out of the love of the game for the game, so I just want to let you know that I look forward to the hour I get once a week to get me through the day, and I appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate you.
We appreciate you. If we're the only thing getting you through your day, I'm sorry. We can offer you some other help otherwise. The recent episode on Forged Weapon was a real gem.
Thank you.
There you go, Josh. Positive feedback for getting into the weeds. Getting into the weeds was well worth the wait, and it wasn't just in the in-depth mechanics discussion I enjoyed, but the history of the evolution in the game as well. I missed out on everything past first edition until I picked up fourth from hearing the podcast. So he actually picked it up after hearing us. That's amazing. The Forged Weapon episode to me was a lot like discussions you get to have with your grandparents when you were younger. You have to be sure to be present or ask the right questions when the answers are available. Anyway, I locked onto a comment by Josh about possibilities regarding Forged Weapon becoming a temporary buff rather than a semi-permanent thing like it is currently. I really want to make it be known that I think this is a great direction to go with Forged Weapon if design space ever allows in the future. Weaponsmiths are the only discipline that contributes so much from what things are done during downtime. Journeymen can add 5 to 8 adds to weapons, and what the melee-focused characters do with that is very impressive. I have never had or played with a weaponsmith for exactly that reason, I believe. A lot of game masters I know just run a Game Master PC weaponsmith to have around for that reason. Since oftentimes weaponsmiths are often overshadowed in other areas, I think it would be a good way of resolving it. I'm actually rethinking my allowances to PCs when it comes to weapon and armor forging by paying cash to NPCs for it now. I may restrict it to see if that encourages anyone to play one. I listen to a lot of audiobooks and podcasts when I am at work, and I've been listening to stuff on the history of language lately. The one I am listening to now is about how it is believed that the original language from which English and most European languages derive from is in fact from modern Ukraine, and it got me thinking. If you fudge the years just a tiny bit, it is entirely plausible that the elves from Barsaive are the founders of our mother tongue. And just as in our history, the people that would become the Greeks left Ukraine, slightly after people leaving for Turkey, and the founders of Thera did something similar in Earthdawn. Just something to think about, but I guess my question is really, why did the original developers select Ukraine as the setting? If Josh has any answers or speculation to that, it would be awesome. Thanks again, Brandon.
I don't know why they chose Ukraine as the setting area. I think it's awesome. I think it's kind of cool that they did, but I don't have any insight into why.
No, and I've heard.
Unlike Morgan, I don't have Lou on speed dial.
And I don't. The interviews I've heard with Lou, I don't think anyone's ever asked that question. So that would be the one question we could ask Lou. We can put the pin in that one.
That is a great question to.
Yeah, because most fantasy games make up their own map.
That would be a great question for Lou.
Yeah, because most fantasy games make up their own map and their own continents and their own geography. So they're just, by the way, this world doesn't exist anywhere that we actually know of. Earthdawn is an overlay of ancient Earth in that geographical location. So that's don't know that one.
So I was just taking a look at the Weaponsmith 4th edition talent lists.
Yeah.
And stuff. We talked about them. We talked about the Circle 1 through 8 stuff in the Weaponsmith episode, whatever episode number that was.
Yeah, way back when.
But I grabbed the companion and was flipping that through here. And it doesn't look like the talent that I'm thinking of, or that I had mentioned, is actually in 4th edition anymore.
Oh. Because, we'll run down the second half of the talent list eventually.
Right. But I just went through the list of what was in their
talent list,
Warden and Master talent lists and options, and I didn't see any names that jumped out at me saying, "Oh yeah, this is the one."
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm curious.
Is it a knack?
No, I don't think it's. I am fairly sure that it was a talent, and I've just got to pull up because I can't easily get to the physical book. I've got to pull up my PDF copy of the original, the 1st edition companion.
Probably also faster.
Oh, maybe it was maybe it was even lower than that. Hold on. Yeah, okay. So 1st edition, wow, it was lower circle than I thought. Improved Blade is a 1st edition weaponsmith talent, available at 8th circle. Allows allows a character to add a temporary bonus to the damage step of a weapon. Quick magic ritual based on Forged Blade. So they must have Forged Blade in order to use it. Basically, they make a test against the damage step of the weapon. If successful, the damage goes up by 1, and they may improve a single blade a number of times equal to their rank in Improved Blade. But it only lasts for 24 hours. So that is not available in 4th edition currently. So that's another thing that in earlier editions I think could potentially have been difficult, because you could stack Improved Blade on top of Forge Blade
Yeah.
get even higher damage bonuses, but that actual stacking is not actually in the rules anymore. There might be a knack in 4th edition that maybe does something similar, but I'm not going to go diving into that.
Fair enough.
But yeah, like it would be a very different paradigm, I think, if you approach the weaponsmith and maybe looking at their lower circle enhancement ability being much shorter duration, and then maybe either having it be a higher circle ability or a high rank knack or something like that extends the duration or makes it whatever. It's an interesting idea, and that's all I'm going to say. Like, I don't see us like super big time revising how things work on that at all.
No, go explore and tell us how that works out.
I think we answered all the questions there. Sorry, I got distracted looking something up while you were reading the email.
You're good. On to the anonymous email, because we had somebody who actually did not want their name read on air, which is just fine.
That's fine.
We will hold off on that. Hi, I mustered the courage to start running a game of Earthdawn for my friends recently, and thank you for your podcast. The lore overviews helped a lot, and your one-shot with the crit show too. I've been listening to the episodes in a semi-random order whenever I walk my dog. Which is fine, because you can listen to them in any order except for the ones where we talk about the timeline. Those are
yeah,
those
you probably want to. But even that doesn't necessarily.
No, that doesn't have to be suggested. Not mandatory. My group is going to be starting up in a few weeks when everyone's finished character creation, and I'm really excited. I have a bunch of random questions, so here goes. First, could you do an episode on the passions? They're coming up.
Yes.
They're slated soon. They're coming up.
Yeah. Obviously not this week.
No.
Yeah, no, we can do that. We've already, like, it's already been planned, and I don't know that we're going to get to all of them in a single episode, but it is.
Lord, no.
We'll talk about them. I like talking about the passions.
Yeah, we had this idea of maybe doing a passion and then maybe doing some questers, and then we finally figured out maybe we should just talk about one passion and their quester in one episode, and then maybe have 12 episodes.
So we'll start getting into that. We'll start getting into that soon.
Yeah, spring 2021. They're neat. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on them. I think I saw a few adventure hooks for trying to resuscitate or redeem the mad passions, and that seemed like an interesting high-level challenge for characters to be pursuing. Secondly, do you have any favorite adventures that you like running for newer groups? Totally not asking for me, who might need them. I've already settled on a slightly modified version of Ardanian's Revenge as the group's opening plot, but after that, it's kind of free space.
Ardanian's Revenge is a good one for people, especially who are new to the setting. It will take a little bit of adaptation because it's a 3rd edition adventure.
Yep.
It'll take a little bit of work to adapt it to 4th edition. Not a huge amount.
Nah.
The premise of Ardanian's Revenge is that you can do, like, there's sort of 2 approaches to it. One is to start with the player characters in the care that is sort of the focus of it. And always starting as a new campaign with people who are unfamiliar with the setting in a care. And so, as we've talked in past episodes, having a limited area that you need to worry about and devise and control being able to control some of the information, and that the player characters who grew up in this very limited environment may have just heard things about the outside world and whatnot. So yeah, that's Ardanian's Revenge is really great.
Yeah.
I think the Legends of Barsaive adventures are good for newer players. They're obviously designed for introducing people at conventions, and we can't assume that people are familiar with the setting when they sit down at one of those. I think if you're doing them for a home game, it's not a whole lot of extra work to kind of stitch them together into a little bit more of a cohesive flow through whatever. You can do a lot more to flesh out, like, the relationships with the various guild NPCs that act as mentors and whatnot for the characters in that campaign story.
Yeah.
So that's good. The initial adventures that were released for Earthdawn, Mists of Betrayal, Terror in the Skies, I've mentioned before on the show, I think how I really like them as stories. I like them as, like, adventure storylines.
Yeah.
But their balance can be a little bit wonky, and you would probably need to use them as a framework for adapting and whatnot as a new. But yeah, our Ardanion's Revenge is a great first choice.
It is.
I can't think of any that are better suited.
No.
I mean, I've written a couple of like real introductory type adventures, but they are not published yet. So
no, fair. I have no qualms with that, and my opinions are well stated. Thirdly, and I do mean this in the kindest way, you mentioned that the step dice and crunchiness of Earthdawn could be a barrier to new players. I feel like this is definitely the case. My group has a range of players from playing Shadowrun and Rifts since the 90s to I just started playing RPGs a few years ago. And we are all united in thinking that the lore and the setting are really cool and being afraid of the steps dice tables. I think it's one of those systems that works if the GM is already familiar with it, but if it's new to the whole group, it's hard to get everyone to wrap their head around it.
Mm-hmm.
The compromise for us was to use the Savage Worlds version of Earthdawn, which is a bunch of house rules to fill out the talents, but it's not very fleshed out by itself. I was wondering if you had any other plans for a more rules-light narrative type of rule set for Earthdawn. Completely understand that it's a matter of personal taste, and maybe not something you can comment on, though. Thoughts?
Yeah. No, not specifically. I know that Vagrant
Workshop.
Which is Karsten Dom's studio.
Yeah.
He worked pretty significantly on 3rd edition, licensed Earthdawn to do a much more narrative rules light version called Age of Legend, which is based on the Freeform Universal system.
I have that book.
Yeah.
It's using fate dice, which is all pluses and minuses.
Yeah, it's a good. I mean, it's I've not actually played it, but I've looked through it, and it's a different approach.
Mm-hmm.
I have no strong opinion on either the Savage Worlds or Pathfinder variants of Earthdawn that were released by Red Brick. I have not played either of them, and I'm not sure. From people who are more familiar with those systems, I have not heard great things about them.
Fair.
My suggestion, and I think I've mentioned this in past episodes, he may not have heard them because of his scattershot going through, but for newer people to the game, don't worry so much about like adjusting steps on the fly. Calculate what the steps are for the tests and then adjust the result. It's not going to be necessarily quite as pure, quote unquote, of a mechanical experience for it, but it ends up being a lot easier. So that the only time that you need to adjust the dice that you're rolling, adjust the steps that you're rolling, is when you are in downtime and you are spending legend points to increase things and whatnot. So it's you can calculate your steps ahead of time and have the dice written down right there on the sheet and refer to them.
Yeah.
Then just make adjustments to the result after the fact. It changes things in what I consider, unless you're dealing with like really significant amounts of adjustment. Yeah. It's not that big a deal.
I have two suggestions, which is one, when I started getting people into this one, my fantasy gamers came over from D&D a little bit, and my other non-fantasy gamers came over from Rifts, and they came over from Shadowrun and so forth. So we didn't have a really big hard time adjusting to the crunchiness of the dice. We actually kind of like dice. So what I liked about Earthdawn, the very first edition, the very first character sheet, had the step table on it. And so the players could look down and go, okay, now I'm rolling this, add 2, check my table and roll the dice. So if you don't have a character sheet that has that, copy off the step dice table, hand it out. Everybody's got it for reference. You'll use it forever. Go from there. And the second one is really, it's not all that crunchy. It's just a little crunchy.
It's the thing about Earthdawn compared to, say, although it's not quite as true so much anymore with the current edition of D&D.
Yeah.
But that the mechanics for Earthdawn are unified. You have a step, the steps are going to roll the dice, and it goes from there. And once you can kind of get onto that, and if you're someone who has played other games, even if you're not necessarily familiar with the step system, it'll probably be easier for you to adjust to that.
Yeah.
And so forth. And if you've got people who are relatively new to games but are eager to try something new, they can figure it out. It's not that hard. Again, especially when you are in the heat of the moment throwing the dice at the table, use the dice that are on the sheet and go from there. Everything else after the fact is there can be, especially as you get into higher circles and having more talents and whatnot, there can be a lot of fiddly bonuses and penalties that can add up. But when you're starting out and you've got brand new first circle characters, you actually don't have a lot of those that are going to come into play.
No, and you're really not rolling 2 dice at the same time till you get to 2d6. Then
you're gonna get. I mean, your characters are going to be rolling 2, maybe 3 dice for the stuff that they're good at. 3, 2 dice for their primary talents,
and then 1 for
3, karma. Third dice for karma. But again, like spellcasters, you're looking at threadweaving, spellcasting, astral sight. Fighter types you're going to have your melee weapons. You're going to have avoid blow, or there's not going to be a lot of stuff. Like they might have 1 or 2 talents there that allow that, like archers got mystic aim.
Well,
right, as a talent that adds to subsequent rolls. But you don't get a lot of those in the first couple of circles generally, or you're not going to be dealing with like multiples and so forth. So it shouldn't be too bad.
My second point is make that a selling point when you talk to them about how the dice steps actually work, because in 4th edition, if you roll well enough, 2 extra successes or whatever the case may be, you're increasing your damage dice and say, this is when you get to roll your big dice. You get to roll your D12 and your D20 and so forth and so on. So make that the selling point of, oh, look, now you get to use the really big ones. And so that's been my selling point.
As they mentioned in the crit show thing, we are rolling all of our dice.
The dice. Yeah. So like I said, don't make that a hindrance. Don't make that an obstacle to overcome. That is the selling point. You finally get to use all those dice in your dice bag. I came from Shadowrun where I had to roll, 3 dozen D6s to cast my stinking spells as a combat mage. Yeah, D6s are kind of boring. This is where you get to use your D8 and your D10 together and your 2D12 and so forth. So make that the selling point. Spin it that way. That's my second piece of advice. So that does it for our email questions. If you have an email question for us, by the way, Josh and I love to answer those and offer all kinds of suggestions. Feel free to email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. We should probably start talking about the Bloodwood, because this is one of the geographical areas that I have not shied away from, but haven't had much opportunity to delve into. And I hadn't read the book in 20 years. I had to go back and refresh my memory. This is a place that we should be delving a whole lot more into, because the whole thing just says go away. Yeah. So, of course, we should go there.
The Bloodwood is
great.
I had to think for a moment about whether I was actually going to say it. I mean, the Bloodwood's not really... It's not really great, but it's great.
It's great. It is evil. It is just nasty to get into.
It is gnarly.
Weeds. Oh, man.
That's the problem with the Bloodwood is that...
Among many problems.
Well... Stepping outside of the setting for a moment.
Yes.
One of the issues with Bloodwood is that it is a fascinating and interesting and unique setting.
Oh, I refreshed my memory and said I need to take somebody back in here just to see how they'd react to it.
At the same time, because of its nature, because of how insular and closed off and, frankly, dangerous it is.
Oh, very dangerous.
It is difficult, I think, for your standard Earthdawn campaign to deal with the Bloodwood that much. That generally, I feel like in some ways the Bloodwood is like the setting equivalent of the Cavalryman or like airship stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That frequently, if you are going to have a game that involves it, the game tends to end up revolving quite a bit around it.
Well, don't take the Bloodwood lightly. If you're going to go there, have a plan, know what you're going to throw at your characters, and they better walk in with some expectations as well, because it's not just, we're going to just drop out the Bloodwood like you're going to 7-Eleven. It's not going to be the same thing. The Bloodwood will overtake you and waylay every single one of your plans.
Yeah. So the Bloodwood is fantastic and wonderful and amazing and dark and creepy and unique and unsettling and
It is the goth setting of Earthdawn. Something like that. It's not to be taken lightly. It is heavily, I can say vegetated. It's heavily covered in vegetation. So it's trees everywhere,
verdant.
Roots everywhere. Verdant, thank you, is the word I was looking for. It's got strange creatures, inhabitants, the whole thing really, I mean, you come across pools of blood in the ground because it's
Everything
interconnected with
you're soaking in it.
Yes. If you come across quicksand, it ain't water. It's sand and blood. But the whole thing revolves around the fact that there was a ritual of thorns done, this huge ritual magic to save them from the scourge, where it caused the blood elves to bleed because thorns pierced their body.
And other animal.
Oh, and other animals as well.
Like the Ethendrill, for example.
Yes, and when that blood hits the ground, it's absorbed by the forest itself, and like a network of tree roots, it actually is harboring all of that blood toward the center of the bloodwood itself, the forest's heart. And yeah, if the ground is squishy, it's not because it's water. Yeah. So everything about this place is creepy and says, go away, which of course makes you want to run something in it because it is a fascinating place to send your entire party. If you want to kill them.
Or if you just want to creep them the F out.
Absolutely. So if you want to get into the creepy, the weird, and the horrific with a touch of beauty, the Bloodwood is where you should take your whole party. So we talked about, just really briefly, the Ritual of Thorns, which if you don't know anything about Earthdawn by now, yeah, you're in trouble.
We have covered the Ritual of Thorns in other episodes. Go back and look in the archives.
Yeah.
We discussed it in... I'm sure we discussed it in the timeline episode talking about the Scourge.
Oh, more than likely.
We've mentioned it, I'm sure, once or twice elsewhere, because anytime Alakia comes up, I wax rhapsodic about that crazy woman.
And that horrific thing that changed the course of the entire wood.
Yeah, so, and what a broken, awful garbage person she is.
I love that phrase. So the ritual actually has a benefit along with its side effect. The side effect, of course, is the thorns and the bleeding and the pain. But the benefit is that those who undergo it, it lengthens their lifespan considerably. It says so in the book. I just looked it up a couple days ago.
That is what some say.
Ah, gotcha. So anyway, the whole of Bloodwood is about 600 miles of forest. Yeah.
Understanding that there are, in fact, immortal elves.
Yes.
Understand that anytime the elves talk about something, this lengthens their life, it is quite frequently propaganda being spread by the immortals to explain why they're still around.
Fair enough. What? Elves do that? No, just kidding.
Well, some elves do that a lot.
So where do you want to start with the geography of the high points and low points of the Bloodwood? Because really, I had forgotten that the whole Bloodwood is bisected by a river.
Yeah,
and that
more or
there's
less.
River travel through the Bloodwood
let's start. Yeah. Let's start then at Eidolon, which will likely be one of the most common places. Like, Eidolon is not technically part of the wood, but it is the most likely location for most people to interact with or begin their venturings into the wood.
Yes.
Because it is where the Mothingale River, which is the river that flows southerly through the Bloodwood, joins with the Serpent River.
Yeah.
And there's the Mothingale and the Lesser Mothingale. Yep. The Mothingale is the one that kind of runs right through the heart of the wood. The Lesser Mothingale is a tributary that is further to the west of that and runs through the western.
Sorry, I'm just studying the map right here in my hot little hands. No, the Mothingale. Mothingale makes that kind of U, that reverse J shape, and the Lesser Mothingale goes straight north and south.
Oh, okay. So the Lesser Mothingale is the one that goes through the heart.
Yeah. The
Mothingale is the... we had them backwards. That's fine.
That's okay. It's because they're both named the same thing, but one is lesser. So,
But basically, there are two rivers. There's one that runs down the sort of western side in the western reaches of the wood.
Yep.
And then kind of cuts across and flows into the Serpent. And then there's the what I guess is the lesser Mothingale, which more or less drops straight down through the center of the wood.
Pretty much bisects the whole thing. Right next to the forest's heart and the blasted heath and all that. So
Yes.
But Care Eidolon.
Eidolon is a joint venture between the Bloodwood, between the royal court and House Syrtis, the Tiskrang Aropogoi House Syrtis, that was built on the remains of a care that was started by a group of Wormwood elves fleeing prior to the institution of the Ritual of Thorns. The information on that, there's a little bit more info. I don't know whether it's in the Bloodwood sourcebook itself, but I know it's talked about a little bit in Elven Nations.
Yeah, I think more in Elven Nations because
Elven Nations goes a little bit more into some of the like historical stuff that was going on there compared to Bloodwood. But that's basically like there was a whole bunch of stuff that was going on as the wooden care of Wormwood was failing, and part of that was a group of folks who fled the wood and were creating a care. And it might have been they actually left like early because they didn't think the wooden care was going to survive. Yeah. And they left and nobody knew what happened to them. And all that was kind of left behind was the remains of an unfinished care just outside the wood at the confluence of the Mothingale and Serpent rivers.
Mm-hmm.
Eidolon is a fortress that was built on top of that, basically as a way to try and forestall the expansion of House Ishkarat as a threat post-Scourge, because they were otherwise encroaching into House Syrtis territory, and the Wood didn't like that much, because if House Ishkarat controlled that river junction, then they would have a lot, and the Denerastus allies of House Ishkarat would have a lot of control and influence over Bloodwood's contact with with those outside the wood. Because while it is possible to venture into the wood overland, it is that river connection that is the primary sort of trade route in and out of the wood with the outside world.
Yes.
And so there are representatives of the wood there, as well as the Tiskrang magistrate who administers the place. But that is where most people are likely to deal with the wood and or try and work out how they might be able to venture in.
Yeah, because it's just outside of the wood, a little bit to the south. You have to cross the river.
Well, it's actually in the river. It's like on an island in the river.
Yeah.
It doesn't really show that on the map, but if you read the description in Elven Nations, it is in the river. It's a fortress in the middle, on an island in the middle of the river.
Gotcha. Because the next spot that you might encounter, where it's, I can't say legal, but you can get in without being accosted too much, is through river travel. But you go up to the town of Trenevar, which is also kind of the other waypoint for a lot of trade, and it has their version of the Grand Bazaar, which is really quite puny comparatively speaking. And it's also a whole lot more reserved. It's just there. It's basically, 40 yards wide, and everybody is civil. Nobody is barking. Nobody is shouting. Nobody is carnival barking to get you to buy stuff. You just walk in, and a couple things are there. Maybe not the thread items, but the amount of goods purchasable are quite diminished from what you would find in the Grand Bazaar of Thrall, because it's not the Grand Bazaar. But if you want to buy something, you just walk up and buy it. They don't actually haggle, and they just say, yeah, okay, fine. And there you are. So it's very civil. But Travenar is just inside the southern fringe of the Bloodwood, and that would be otherwise the most accessible area on how to get in there, because other places are not quite as easily accessed as that one.
Yeah. But assuming that you can, get the permission to do so.
Yeah. So overall, real quick, the Bloodwood is itself about 600 square miles of forest. You can enter mostly through the north, the west, the south. The east really don't recommend a whole lot because it's really close to the Elf Queen's palace, and that's pretty much the most heavily guarded. So if you're going to get in, that's not the way to do it. This is your bank heist. Don't go the hardest route possible. 60,000 elves live in the Bloodwood. About half are nomadic.
Yeah, I was going to say it is a very sparsely relatively speaking, it is sparsely populated.
Yes, because of the permanent settlements that are there, That's where you're going to find clusters of the elves. And then the other half is really nomadic because they have to hunt and they have to fish and they have to grow gardens. And so they move around quite a bit.
It was what, 600 square miles?
600 square miles and 60,000 elves. Those are odd numbers.
That's a population density of only about 100 people per square mile.
Yeah. So it's a lot of forest.
That's overall. When you consider that half of that 60,000 population are the ones living in the population centers, that actually means that outside of those areas, you're looking at even less of a
footprint from.
So before we start getting into the different areas, let's talk about getting into the wood, right? So we talked about Eidolon, we've talked about rivers sort of being the primary, but of course that, like, if you're trying to sneak into the wood, that way is going to be kind of heavily watched because it is the most common sort of easily accessible way in. The eastern side you mentioned, because it's closest to the palace, is also likely to be heavily guarded. The borders of the wood, if you can actually get past the borders, and the borders are fairly well protected, even...
Yeah. There's guard stations every day's walk or so.
There's guard stations. There's other stuff going on that the elves have set up as...
We'll get there.
There may only be 60,000 elves, but there are a lot of magical elves, a lot of powerful magical elves among the Bloodwood, and
we'll get
spirits
to the
and like all of that stuff.
We'll get to the go away part in a minute.
But if you can get past the patrolled area, past the borders into the wood itself, you can go a ways without encountering people.
Living,
Well, people.
People, yes. Sorry. Living things is a different matter. But yeah, you can go a long way without encountering other name givers.
It just occurred to me. It's not completely accurate, but one of the things that kind of occurs to me, if you are looking for some inspiration about like, we talked about the creepiness and the blood and whatnot of Bloodwood. Yeah. But if you're looking for like inspirations, I'm immediately thinking of two things, both from Tolkien.
Oh, cool.
Mirkwood from The Hobbit, okay, and the Old Forest from the early part of The Lord of the Rings, where the hobbits cross the wall into the Old Forest and meet Tom Bombadil, Hey Dilly Dally-O, which was completely cut from the movie for understandable reasons.
Yes.
But still, the Old Forest and Old Man Willow and stuff like that that's in there are weird.
Yes.
But like, those are a couple of things that you could use as inspiration for maybe the kind of feeling that you would have inside the Bloodwood, with added blood and thorns and pain and
doom and gloom
warping and stuff.
Yeah. I was thinking just the forest moon of Endor from Return of the Jedi, just for density of trees.
Yeah.
It's way too bright and sunny, but just to get the idea of a forest first and then add from there, but that's just me.
Like if Stanley Kubrick's The Shining with the forest moon of Endor.
Yeah.
I'm thinking specifically of the bit from The Shining where the blood comes pouring out of the elevator.
Absolutely.
It's
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. So, okay, since we're starting kind of in the south, let's go with Eidolon and Trenevar. The southern fringe. This is where the great shipyards were, pretty much over on Dren Hathal, I believe. And they were abandoned because Queen Alakia told them to put them to torch on purpose. They were going to commit to being their own country, essentially their own care, stronghold. That's not what I'm looking for. Anyway, that they were going to be themselves alone and not actually do any more shipping with anybody else, and so they had to be self-reliant. And she ordered the whole town to be put to the torch.
Yeah, I think that's one of the stories.
Yep.
There is also a lot of. They probably don't talk about it in the wood that much, but there was a lot of conflict between the elves and their ships and the Tisrang.
Yes. No, they didn't talk
Serpent
about it
River.
much in this one, but I think the Serpent River covers it much better.
Yeah. That there's pretty much only one elven ship that's left, and it doesn't sail the Serpent, it's on the Eris Sea.
Yes.
So, like, the Queen might say now that, oh yes, we destroyed those so that we could be self-reliant, but it's also probably because the elves got their butts kicked by the Tisrang. And our porcelain lady fair,
garbage person,
if she wasn't queen at the time, probably was not crazy about that. situation.
Not so much. But there's a whole bunch of guard stations, and this is where the two rivers kind of meet a little bit. The Mothingale running a little bit east-west and the Lesser running north and south. And so this is where most people would be entering the wood in the first place, is either through the river travel, getting off at one of these small little ports, or since it's the most easily accessible way to come in from the rest of Barsaive to the south, this is probably the majority, the popular way to enter the Bloodwood at all.
And it is the more densely populated part of the wood, because it is close to the sort of major trading centers and things like that.
And since they get most of their goods, there's trading going on with the rest of Barsaive in some degree. This is where all the goods come in from, black market or otherwise. And so this is where people would congregate to, being south. And that's just where the majority of them are.
It's also, because it is more populated, also a bit more cultivated. Now, the elves of the wood do tend to live a bit more in harmony, like stereotypical Rivendell, Lothlorien, elf, like D&D elves of Alfheim kind of thing, where the elves are like at one with their environment, despite the fact that environment is, a Cenobite's wet dream or something. But it's more cultivated, which is to say that the undergrowth and wild life, or twisted version thereof, that you would typically find in other parts of the wood is a bit more tamed in the southern fringe. What agriculture there is in the wood does tend to be focused a bit more in the south.
Yeah.
Because elves, they do still need to eat. And so they, the areas that they've cleared does tend to be a bit more, because it's also closer to the Serpent River, and the Serpent River Valley being a very fertile area. The soil there. I mean, the soil in the Bloodwood is probably like super rich everywhere because it's fed with the blood of living things.
Yeah. All living things.
Of the Bloodwoods regions, the southern fringe is probably the most civilized.
And receptive.
It's still all blood and creep and weird and whatnot, but it is
a little off.
The safest of the areas. Outsiders are probably still not advised to go wandering off.
Not at all. There's not a lot of inherent danger to the surroundings, but when you get to the western border, now the western border is also bisected by the Mothingale River, because the Mothingale starts north, comes south a little bit, twisty and windy and all sorts, and then heads almost due east or southeast, and crossing the southern border. But that western part, because there's still some of the Bloodwood to the west, and that is known as the western border. That's where you're going to come across a whole bunch of nastiness, like the Thornmen wards, the Assassin Vines, the Blood Oaks, and the Root Walkers. That's right. A lot.
The western border is the furthest from the palace, because the palace is more or less over on the eastern side of the wood, and the western border, because of something that we'll be getting to in a couple of minutes, the western border is kind of isolated, largely from the west of the wood. Because the Mothingale does flow down into the southern fringe, there is that lifeline of a sense. But once you get away from where the river flows in the western, you are in trackless wilderness, and so consequently, a lot of the magical defenses that the elves have developed, or that have developed as side effects of the Ritual of Thorns, are found more in the western border than in other parts of the wood, because there aren't as many elves there to deal with them.
And plus, if you go due west from the western border, you come across Iopos, which is not friendly either. So, and there's no love lost between. And
you've got the fire scale. You've got the fire scale moot as well in the Skull Mountains, which are off to the west of the wood there as well.
That's pretty much a few main reasons why that's a little bit more heavily guarded for the Bloodwood itself. So you probably don't want to enter that way, but you can try. It's, if you want to try out your heist movie, it's not as tough as going in the east, but that's one of those things there.
Very rich in true wood. So it is attractive to poachers or prospectors as a result of that. Despite their isolation, the dominant political power in the western border counts themselves among the most loyal of the Queen's subjects. We're not really getting into like politics and stuff a whole lot in this, but that's the western border.
So on the north, since we've covered the south and the west, we're going to kind of wrap around clockwise. To the north, known as the Northern Reaches, most of the land above that on the original maps, first, second, maybe even third edition, really didn't cover a whole lot of land above that, but it's mostly inhospitable in the first place. They're not really...
Yeah.
Yes.
In its own way, it is more isolated and dangerous than the western border. And the reason for that is because at that point you're really starting to get into like geographically northerly climes.
And so there's
and so it's even less sparsely populated. Like it is more sparsely populated than already sparsely populated parts of the wood.
So we're talking very, very few elves per square yard than anything else. And this is where they have more reactive patrols versus proactive patrols for the other three areas of the wood, because they're waiting for something to trigger the Thornmen wards, and then they go investigate it. So it's one of those, they don't have a lot to watch out for.
Yeah, there's not much really north of the wood until you get all the way north up to the shore of the White Sea, up to where
it's pretty
Shosara is
just north of the wood there. So,
but yeah, there's it basically says that there's stuff north of the wood, but it's all largely wilderness, largely uninhabited nomadic tribes kind of thing. And so unlike the southern unlike the more southerly portions of the wood where you've got the rest of Barsaive that they kind of need to deal with and patrol and whatnot because of those interactions, the northern parts of the wood, if somebody is up to the north and able to make their way to the wood, good luck, man.
Yeah.
It is, for typical games and most player characters, you're not going to be, to get to the north, you need to go through the rest of the wood.
Or circle all the way around
and you generally don't have a reason to do it. Or circle all the way around and break in from there. Like, if you are trying to secretly infiltrate the wood and you have time, that may actually be, even though it's more dangerous, that may actually be the more covert way to do it because it is less heavily populated and less patrolled. And so you may be able to sneak across that border territory in order to get in.
They've got 7 permanent settlements there, so that's where their main population is. The favorite 2 are Goro Imri and Aruane. Because Goro Imri...
I was going to say, Goro Imri is one that's worth mentioning. It is the
name means,
town.
Are we not outsiders? I love that.
That basically, it is a town that exists at the discretion of the Queen. It is a town that is where blood elves who have children, who have had children that they don't want to subject to the ritual, send them there. And outsiders, other name givers, dwarves, trolls, whatever, also live there. It is a community, and there are some blood elf dissidents and so forth who are not happy with what's been going on. It actually is inside the wood. No doubt Alakia is aware of it and lets it continue to be for her own reasons. But it's also way the F up.
West. It's in the northwest corner, man.
We know where it is, and if we ever have to deal with them, better to have a place where they're all kind of congregated than to smack them there and have all of the roaches. Not that I think they are. That's, I'm sure, Alakia's point of view. And have them all scatter into various other parts of the wood. No, Goro Imri is interesting. In the North Reach, you are also more likely, just in general, to run into folks who are, because they are so far from the rest of Barsaive, because they are isolated and in a dangerous area, are apt to be a bit more welcoming's not the right word, but tolerant of outsiders. If you are able to get past the defenses and into those areas, you are more likely to be able to find dissidents and so forth who are willing to skirt the Queen's law in order to do their thing.
Arawana is notable because they've harnessed and cultivated the tree boughs to work as pathways so that when walking between all the shops and all the residences, never have to actually touch the ground. So it's just one of those cool little aspects I can visually see like happening in a movie somewhere. But the Northern Reaches also is home to the Grove of Thorns, which is a training school. And every 5 years, they have a Festival of Blades. So if you want to get your people into the Bloodwood, here's maybe an idea to use, because the winner gets a threat item of their choice and an audience with the Queen. But they're only allowed to win once. You can never re-enter after you win.
This is the downside of the Northern Reaches, is that the basically war college of the Blood Elves is located up there.
But they're accepting of any name giver who wants to go study.
That's true. But still, you don't want to cause trouble because a whole lot of very highly skilled martial artists
you will get your ass
among
kicked.
the number up there.
Without a doubt, because they're not playing around. But also, maybe something you want to go investigate in there as well is there is Figreach, the Great Hearth Forge, has that in the Northern Reaches as well. So if you're looking to get, because they'll accept anybody who wants to come work at the Forge, but pretty much they're making weapons for all the Blood Warders, so you might come in third or fourth or fifth in line to actually use the Forge. However, at Noirin, they have the best healers and the Shrine of Garland that is, I can say Barsaive renown, but it is one of the best places you can ever want to get healed in, because they have more poultices and herbs and knowledge about healing than anybody else. So there's at least right there 3 different ways to get your folks interested in getting into the Bloodwood. And then we can circle back around. The eastern border doesn't actually have a name, but it's where the palace actually is. And there's like 5 or 6 other little towns, cities around them.
Yeah. So the Elf Queen's palace and the whatnot, the Bloodwood's political structure is broken down into what are called the Renels, which are basically the great families. And each of them sort of has an area that they are predominant in. Like there is one Renel that is largely in charge of the South Reach, or the Southern Fringe. There's another that's sort of largely in charge of the Western border. There's another one that's sort of largely in charge of, there's a few of them. But each of them also have like their own little village and stronghold near the court, where their prominent family members that must deal with the court live, and affiliated and lesser families and so forth also make their home there. So you've got the palace and its immediate sort of surroundings, and then usually within about a day's travel or so, half a dozen other smaller settlements that are the bases of the local bases of operations for each of the great houses. But everything is in service of her royal porcelainness, Alakia, the immortal.
Because she's got one of each of the main houses, each of the 8 Renels as her consortis, and those are her main 8 advisors that she permisses and dismisses as she chooses. A lot of S's in that one. But yeah, that's the main political structure, and she does what she wants with them from there. I read something earlier to Miss Garbage Person herself. Her primary goal is getting and keeping personal power. She is a master at playing the court's various factions against each other to maintain the delicate balance of power that best suits her. She quickly takes steps to diminish them, sometimes by merely chastising a prominent figure, in more drastic cases by dismissing one of the Renel's consortis. Every tactic is designed to keep her in complete control. Alakia steers the Elven court in the direction she wants it to go. Her habit of appointing and dismissing courtiers and counselors apparently on a whim is actually a carefully crafted strategy to ensure her continued dominance. She is vain to a fault.
She has had a very long time to practice playing that game.
Alakia is vain to a fault, but vanity is not a weakness. Yeah, she rarely confides in others lest she risk betrayal.
Well, it is not a weakness in the traditional way that vanity is a weakness. But I would definitely say that Alakia's vanity is a weakness, but not in the way that you can't flatter. You can't flatter her. Like, that's not a way to get in. Her vanity is tied up in her power and and the perception of her power. And that is where her weakness comes from. And that is where so much trouble that the Wood faces currently is as a result of that aspect of her vanity, that she cannot admit fault. She cannot admit to being wrong. And so the vanity is not physical beauty. She is, of course, the most beautiful being in Elvendom, and everybody knows it, and it is self-evident, and there is no need to flatter her, because obviously...
Yeah, she knows.
It is clear on his face. No, the vanity, her vanity is tied up in other aspects of her position.
So, let's circle back around again, since we've hit the Elven core.
And then finally...
the forest heart.
So we kind of skipped the rot at the heart of the apple, which is to say the forest's heart. This is where the wooden care was constructed and where all the elves had retreated to and sheltered at the beginning of the Scourge.
Oh, they were good for a couple hundred years, and then everything went sour.
And then everything, started to go to hell. The forest heart is basically like the most dangerous part of the wood. Basically, nobody lives there.
No, corrupted things live there. There's no vegetation at the blasted heath. Nothing grows there. So if you're looking for a desert in the middle of a forest, this is it.
Yeah. There is a small stronghold where some of the most high-ranking blood warders have places where they are researching the damage. Basically the forest heart is...
Everything there is twisted and rotten.
Yeah. So the problem that the wood is facing kind of originates in and is spreading out from the heart. It is spreading. A lot of the area that would have been considered part of the southern region is kind of taken up by the wood. And there is some suspicion that perhaps the fact that the Lesser Mothingale flows right through the middle of it, it is carrying some of whatever that is southerly.
Don't disagree with that.
And expanding.
Yeah. This is where the old Bloodwater Citadel is in ruins because this is where things were crafted. It's also the beginning of the fire birch trees, and there are 8 guard perimeter patrols around this hearth because it is constantly spreading at about a mile a year outward from the center of this place, corrupting more of the bloodwood that's already corrupted. So this is the nuclear wasteland of the bloodwood itself.
Yeah.
It ain't pretty there, but you can take a trip right by it on the river. So go for it.
Yeah. It's awful.
I love how the
Alakia is kind of
in denial.
Blasé. Well, Alakia is kind of blasé in some regards in terms of people in other parts of the wood flaunting her decrees. A lot of Alakia's thing is that, like, she has all of these rules that are in place, especially with regards to the isolation of the wood, but she's not super, like, hardcore. Like, she's not super hardcore about making sure that everybody is always towing the line. A big part of her thing is if you don't get caught, then that's... If you can get away with it, if you don't get caught, great. She probably is aware of a lot more than she lets on, because that gives her power. If she has knowledge that somebody is breaking the rules, she can drop that on them at any time to basically wield that as her
blackmail
royal cudgel to enforce even against other people. Like, oh, your nephew was doing this thing that broke the law. You are now
playing
whatever political brinkmanship I'm up to. I can now use that information to cow you or get you to whatever. I can
manipulate you, blackmail you, extort you.
She is an uber troubadour on top of a whole bunch of other things.
12 circle troubadour, at least.
Well, on top of having a whole bunch of other powers that are beyond beyond the limits of mere adepts.
Yeah.
You know, that's what you get when you're one of the oldest beings on the planet and knows more and has probably forgotten more about magic than most people will ever learn in their lifetimes. She does not have much of a problem with, oh yes, the black market, they're smuggling things up on the ships from Caer Eidolon. That's fine. I know what's going on.
What's good for the goose is good for the gander.
They're keeping it circumspect. It's not a big deal. Like, you know, whatever. But the forest heart is something that she is very, very strongly, no, you don't go there.
That's off limits.
And a big part of that, that's one of her hard lines. And people will go there anyway or venture into the edges of the forest heart because It's the heart of the Bloodwood, and there's a lot of like valuable true wood and other stuff that can be recovered there, even as dangerous as it is. But her limit on that is driven by a couple of things. Publicly, it's, well, I want to keep people safe. I don't want people going in there and like having my subjects die because they encountered something that killed them. Right?
Yeah.
Good
PR.
Ruler kind of thing. But the other part of that is she is trying to, as part of her desperate bid to maintain power and control over the growing instability of the wood as a result of what's going on with the ongoing ritual of thorns and all of the problems that have resulted as a result of that. And for more information on that, you will want to look at Elven Nations. She is trying very, very hard to control the information flow with regards to what's going on with the Forest's Heart. It's kind of known that it's growing slowly. And she said, oh yes, we're trying to figure that out. But she tries especially to keep the information about the Forest's Heart from getting outside of the wood. Because if the true extent of what's going on in the Forest's Heart became known widely outside of Barsaive, outside of the wood, like became widely known in Barsaive, that would provide a lot of ammunition for the people who are of the opinion that the Bloodwood is irredeemably corrupt and should be razed to the ground. And being an outsider who is caught inside the Forest's Heart, especially if you don't have a remit from the crown to be there, and getting a remit from the crown to be there is probably going to be a very, very hard thing to come by. That is a fast way to end up in one of the deepest holes below the palace and never be seen again. In the Forest's Heart, probably, we mentioned the Citadel. You mentioned the Blasted Heath, which has its own thing. Check out Elven Nations for that. Probably the most other notable thing that hasn't been mentioned yet is the Forest's Heart is where Oakheart is located, which is the sort of spiritual center
foundation
of Elvendom. It is a hugely significant tree in the heart of the wood that it's not in great shape. No. And that's kind of a bad thing because it could very well be a core pattern item of the wood. It could very well be something even more significant than that, perhaps to Alakia. If you look at the elven myths of things like Cainreth and the history of how Oakheart ties in so strongly to the queens of the wood.
Yeah, because one disappeared into Oakheart itself, and they had to find a successor. So she actually went into a portal into Oakheart itself.
So, yeah, Oakheart is hugely important, and it's in the Forest's Heart, and it's
not in great shape, as you said.
Yeah.
So, no, this is a fascinating place to take your party, just because we haven't even gone over the basic geographical bank heist that this terrain itself poses as a threat. There is path magic and thorn men to look out for in about every 100 yards or so. You got to watch out for maybe setting off this trap. And path magic is one of those, if you're in there long enough, half an hour or more, the forest itself, the vegetation kind of crawls over the path you just made and redirects you around in circles or away from where you're trying to get to. And eventually, if you don't, find your way out, you'll starve to death because it just won't let anything grow near you.
It won't let you go.
And then there's, of course, the vegetation itself you have to fight over. The assassin vines and the death daisies, and then all the creatures that can come at your way, the blood monkeys, the blood crows, the blood ravens, just all of these things. The blood wasps.
The Essentrills, the hulkers, the giant carnivorous
squirrels. And we're not kidding about that. The giant trapdoor spiders as well.
Yeah.
So...
yeah.
This whole, like I said, the whole forest says, go away or abandon all hope, ye who enter here. So it's one of those, you might think you're sneaking in between border guards, but there's wards, magical wards. There's will
other stuff.
Trigger them, the Thornmen, to surround you until the actual blood warders show up and the guard patrols show up. And so getting in there unnoticed is a Herculean feat. By land. Getting in there by water may be better, but there's only a couple of ways in. And even path magic, by the way, is ascribed to the waterways. The waterways will disguise where you're going and put you in a whole spot where all of a sudden, poof, you're in a lagoon and there's no way out. And then getting in by air, really hard because all the woods themselves, the trees themselves, really are very tall and have a very thick canopy. They go out for yards and yards and yards. So this whole place is a bank vault you need to try and somehow break into. So you better have an engraved invitation.
Couple of places to go to look for more information. First edition Bloodwood sourcebook, a lot of which is kind of recapped and summarized again in Elven Nations, the 4th edition book. Elven Nations, of course, also includes information on Shosara and Seriatha, which are a couple of Elven nations that are tied very strongly to the wood, and there's a lot of like story hooks and whatnot kind of relating to that there, and how, you know, player characters might get involved in
But that's another show.
The 1st edition original adventure, Mists of Betrayal, peripherally takes place in on the fringes of Bloodwood and deals with a couple of prominent blood elves as NPCs in it. One of the Legends of Barsaive adventures involves traveling outside of Parlanthe and heading to Eidolon and venturing into the wood. I think it's Heavy Metal Queen is the name of the adventure. Heavy Metal Queen actually does not refer to Alakia. It refers to another NPC in there. So that also has some things that you could look at and maybe mine for ideas on ways that you might be able to involve your player characters in the wood and take them into that fascinating and beautiful and deadly environment. And
go explore. So if you have any questions about the Bloodwood, we've got like pretty much an hour and 15 now with questions and geography.
We had those emails. We ran a little bit long.
They were long emails.
That's fine.
Good to get to. Nice to have email again.
Yeah.
So if you have any questions for us about the Bloodwood or how to integrate it into your campaign, or if you want to know more about the garbage person in charge of it, Josh would love to pontificate.
Yes, please ask me about Alakia. Send me email questions about Alakia. We'll do like a 3-episode mini series. It'll be like a deluxe VH1.
Alakia on the couch. We'll do a little psychological discrimination out of there and see what we can figure out for discernment. But yeah, we'll get into more of that later on. But we actually are going to wrap this one up now, an hour and 15 or so into this. So if you have any questions, by all means, get a hold of us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. You should know the email address by now. Find us on the usual places, the Twitters, the Facebooks, and various social media sites, the blogs, the forums, and so forth.
Subscribe if you somehow stumbled across this and you are not subscribed. This is episode 58. So we've got 58 regular episodes plus a dozen specials that we've had filled in here and there. So there is plenty of content to keep you busy. If you are new to Earthdawn, we've got some episodes that are good introductory stuff. If you are returning, it's all
we welcome
it's all great.
So until next time, folks, it is time for you to go traipse into the weeds of your bloody legend.
Good night, everybody.